This is the award-winning real estate recruitment company Madison Berkeley's Empower Equity Campaign Reverse Mentoring Sessions. We are supported by the industry networking organisation Ladies in Real Estate. This week, each day, we will publish a session involving a junior female in the industry reverse mentoring a senior female in our industry. The aim of the Empower Equity campaign is to address the issue of female retention within our industry. Historically, the representation of women in our industry has been very low, running at around 13% for many years. The good news is that that figure has gone up quite dramatically, and the work being done around EDI is starting to pay off. However, the latest figures from the Real Estate Balance Industry Survey 2022, which was released in February, found that at board level within the sector, female representation in our industry is running at around 29%, and at senior and leadership level, it's just 27%. This backs up the problems that we hear surrounding retention. Each female partnership in these Empower Equity campaign sessions will aim to start conversations surrounding the issues causing this lack of retention. And the hope is that by opening these discussions, change may be effected and more females will remain in our industry at senior and leadership level. Now it's time to hand over to the junior female and senior female taking part in today's session. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Sarah Thorley. I work at Savills within investment strategy, and I entered the property industry having done a degree in real estate. I came from quite a atypical background in that I studied the Pathways to Property summer school before going to university. So I found out about property through quite an interesting route and didn't really have many connections in the industry. So for me, my sort of 5-year journey into real estate has been an interesting one, and one with quite a few barriers and challenges that I'm looking forward to asking Claire about today.
Hi there, I'm Claire Barber. I've been, I don't want to admit this, property industry for, 20-25 years, probably 25 if I'm being honest. I actually entered slightly unusual routes, certainly back then anyway. I did a geography degree and then a correspondence degree, which back then was by post. So I did that whilst working at Donaldson's. And I think at that time that was quite unusual. I've worked in various companies, commercial background, so tended to focus on retail. About 6 months ago, I moved to Unite Students, where I'm heading up their asset management team.
I think you've had a really interesting journey, Claire, in different sort of sectors, and moving from commercial into student as well, I think must have been an interesting challenge. I'd be really interested to understand what you feel have been the sort of greatest challenges to you as a woman in the industry in terms of establishing yourself and your personal brand.
I think it's changed a lot. When I started working, there were relatively fewer women entering the industry. It definitely decreased over time. I think I spent the vast majority of my time networking, and I put myself in really uncomfortable situations. I put myself in rooms with people where I knew literally nobody, and I would go in and talk and meet new people. And I think that was really challenging. And, there wasn't social media or anything like that then. So it was all about the people you knew and building relationships with people. And I think that still stands now. That's what I've spent a lot of time doing. And I would say that probably at least a couple of the jobs that I've got have been through knowing people. And so getting a foot in the door that way, rather than applying and going through headhunters necessarily. So I think the networking was really important. I also think that when you establish a brand, I think you have to live by those values. I've always tried to do what I'd say I'd do, and I've always tried to be kind of fair and reasonable and honest. For me, that's really important. I think you build a reputation on your integrity, and I've worked quite hard at that, but I have put myself in situations that I don't want to be in, felt really uncomfortable, not knowing a single person in the room, but you kind of do it and get through it. And I think you become better for it.
I think that can be a particular challenge at the start of your career, especially if you come into the industry with few kind of existing connections, to be able to find different networks to tap into. And I've certainly found that I've joined lots of different industry groups that's helped me to sort of accelerate that network and make sure I connect with the right people. But I would be interested, kind of from your perspective, if you were managing a junior woman today, what would you suggest to her in terms of building that network quickly?
I think joining networks is really good, and there's a lot more of those now. And it's interesting your point, actually, because it's much harder when people already know each other as well. And I guess if you've gone through the traditional real estate universities, you're into a business where people already have built relationships just through the fact that they've attended university together. So I think you invariably feel slightly behind if you're coming from a different perspective. I think that's hard. And networks, I think, are brilliant. I would, there's lots and lots of them around, and you get a vast spectrum of people on them as well, which I think get different perspectives. I look at LinkedIn quite a lot, and I think that's really powerful for establishing yourself and resharing things and just building your network on that as well.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned LinkedIn, because for me, that's been a really, really valuable tool. And I think, generally sort of younger people are more interested in using social media and more familiar with those kind of platforms. So it's a great way, I think, to connect with people that perhaps aren't in the exact same part of the industry to you, but could be kind of helpful connections.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
I'd be interested to know as well, within any of those sort of networks or industry groups, how you've connected with people that have inspired you. Have you managed to find sort of informal mentors through those groups? Have there been people, maybe your peers that have helped you with, say, your transition into a new sector?
I've had a couple of mentors that I've sought out because I've admired them and I've thought that they've done great things. They haven't been, one's been female, one's been male. That's been a lot about feeling that I could build some kind of relationship with them and have perhaps similar outlets, but have honest conversations, and I guess show my vulnerability and, the discussions about how I wanted my confidence to be boosted or whatever. I think it's really important to ask people. It's really interesting how you get asked so much more when you get a bit older about things like mentoring, and it's a hugely rewarding thing to do. And I think people appreciate being able to help, particularly other women. I think it is harder being a woman, it just is.
I do think it's really useful with, mentors that I've had. It's been really useful to get kind of diverse perspectives on things. I think you often get channeled into one area within real estate and forget how big the industry is and how many career options there are and how many different sectors there are. And it's, clear, like yourself, you pivoted at a later stage in your career into a new sector. It's very transferable and adaptable. And I think that we sort of go through that education process or through a lot of the larger graduate schemes, and you do end up getting into a particular area that perhaps isn't the area that suits you.
And I think you've got to take time to sit back and think about what you do want to do and where you see yourself in 5 or 10 years, and what's important to you, what interests you, where you want to be, really. Challenging yourself with questions like that, it makes you think. Part of mentoring or perhaps even coaching is being challenged and really thinking about what you want to do and how you're going to get there. I think that's a really good thing.
I agree. I think it's always really interesting to think what's actually important to you in a career, because there's always those aspects around job satisfaction and enjoying the role and, connecting with colleagues and, the role suiting you in terms of going out onto sites or, being more office based, all of those, components that make a role attractive. But I think something that, a lot of us don't speak about, particularly women, and that's not just in real estate, is that salary is important. It allows you to facilitate your lifestyle, and people want to feel like they're being fairly paid. And something I've had a real challenge with in my journey through real estate so far, and, through promotion processes, for example, is understanding what fair pay for that role really is, in particular when you've got quite a unique role. I'd be interested to hear how you've try to overcome that, particularly, moving to new roles, how you've sort of done your research to make sure that you are being fairly paid for the value you're adding.
I think moving roles, generally you should be getting a salary rise, and that's how, people do increase their salaries in lots of circumstances. I think organisations have got a responsibility as well. They need to promote transparency and be clear about salary bands. I think that's really important. I recognise that's not always that clear, and different fee earners will get paid different amounts of money. And, I guess that's all about how much you're making for the business. But I'm not sure there'll ever be complete transparency, but I think you need to educate yourself as much as you can. Don't be afraid to ask how your pay sits with your peers and sits against your peers. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And also, speaking to headhunters, just pick up the phone to people, and ask them what they think you should be paid for what you're doing. There's a lot of recruiters out there. Madison, Berkeley, classic example. You speak with them, understand where you should be for your level of experience. I think women as well tend to be a bit more reticent to ask for more money. I think men are much better at it, as a general statement.
I've definitely found that speaking to recruiters, and I have spoken to Madison Berkeley about my own salary, because I think it's just really useful to get somebody else's opinion on where your experience sits and what you can lean into. And it is personally something I've found particularly challenging, coming from a background where my parents don't work in the corporate world. Their salary was in a public sector role that has quite explicit pay bands. Being able to understand, how to best negotiate your salary. I think there's a real art to negotiation, and, ensuring that you do that in a sort of proper way that gets received well by your manager.
It's definitely more opaque, isn't it, in the private sector? If you're asking in the right way, you've just got to ask. And I think it's important that you feel you're paid fairly. For me, that's the most important thing, is about being paid fairly for what I'm doing. I don't necessarily want to be paid the most amount of money, but I just want to be paid what I think I'm worth. And I think that's really, really important. Otherwise, you become resentful and unhappy.
Absolutely. I think the key is that you feel that you're being valued. I don't think that that's actually just about pay. I think that there's a lot of other components that can make women in particular and people from diverse backgrounds feel more welcomed and feel more supported and feel like they're adding value. I see that there's lots of initiatives out there and lots of benefits and support for colleagues. I think benefits out there like mental health support, private health insurance, that just really do help you to have that well-being aspects within your role. I think that's important to really sort of make sure that you feel supported in your job as well.
The whole work-life balance, I think, is really important, but that being really genuine, so not just saying that we will give you flexibility, but then you leave the office feeling guilty because everybody's still sat or the comments are made. I think genuinely believing that and seeing men work flexibly as well. And obviously the pandemic's changed that enormously. Unite's a brilliant example of that, where they genuinely support people to work in a hybrid, flexible way. And, people work, evenings or very early mornings, whatever it might be, so they can go and pick their kids up or whatever. But being able to do that and feel that you're still valued and that you're still contributing on the same level as everybody else, I think is worth so much, particularly when you have children. Being able to go to a sports afternoon and then work in the evening or whatever, however you want to play it, I think that's worth an awful lot.
I think striking that balance in terms of work life, being able to be flexible with your diary is so important. Like if you can just one morning start a bit later or work a bit later, to be able to work around your own commitments is just invaluable. And I think, in my opinion, something that the industry can really take on, and I think something that's definitely happened more and more post sort of COVID pandemic and, the rise in work from home, is allowing people at all levels to work from home and have autonomy over their schedule. Even when I first joined the industry, I think it was much less commonplace for junior staff members to work from home. We're often in the office all the time, and I loved that for learning from colleagues. It's great to hear colleagues' conversations, and I think being in the office gives you that power of listening in and joining meetings. But I do think for certain sort of more focused tasks, you look at report writing, it is just much easier to do in an environment where you have control over the setting, over whether you're playing music. We all have different brains, we all work in different ways. Allowing people to work in the way that suits them, I think, would really continue to help bring in more women into the industry, because I think people would feel more supported.
I absolutely agree with you. I also think that, certainly I know, and I don't know if you know more than me, I don't know if this is still the case, but I know a lot of women that have left consultancy side because they haven't got the same level of control over their diaries, or, they've got clients. It's much harder. Whereas being client side, I think you can control your diary. That to me is a great shame. I've seen some brilliant female agents leave because they've had children, they've come back to the workplace and they haven't been able to have the amount of flexibility that they would like. I've got a friend at the moment who is contemplating leaving property altogether. She's got 2 young children and works 5 days a week and can't, as an agent, she can't do it all, is how she feels. To me, that's such a shame. I think there needs to be more conversations around those challenges.
I think it's a real shame when anyone feels that they can't have it all within their career. that they can't be supported and they can't work flexibly in a way that suits them. I do think that the 5-day working week, I think it will evolve. I have kind of, positive hope of that evolving. But I think that's really dependent on individual businesses and, individual attitudes. But I do think striking that balance and having autonomy over your agenda, I think, I'm happy to come into the office every day of the week. That doesn't affect me. I'm happy to work from home every day of the week.
Yeah.
I'll sort of go with whatever the company culture is. But I think what's most important for me is having some autonomy over my diary, being able to say, go out for a walk in the middle of the day or pick up a parcel if you need to. I don't know what it is, but it's just having that flexibility to just have power over your own time.
Yeah. Ultimately, you should be judged on your performance, shouldn't you? You shouldn't be judged on, whether you're sitting at your desk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's about what you're producing for the business.
Absolutely. I think being judged on your performance is an interesting one because there's a difference between necessarily performance and what you individually see as success. I would be quite interested. It's something I've grappled with a little bit myself, like what do I think success means in my career? I'd be interested to understand what your sort of measures of success have been in your own career.
I think that's changed probably a little bit over time. I definitely was one of those people that was working all of the time when I was younger. I took 6 months off with both children and went straight back to work. I'm not sure I would have done that now, if I'm honest. For me, it's about feeling that I'm making a difference to that business, feeling that I'm supporting and helping people and growing my team. There's nothing that gives me more joy, sounds like a total cliche, but it's true, than seeing people grow and develop and move on. And actually, people, even though you don't want to lose good people, seeing them move to a bigger and better job, but even if that is outside of the organisation, I think is a very rewarding thing. So I've definitely gone from being focused on myself and working really, really hard to get to the next stage, to thinking more broadly about the business and more broadly about the people within it and what I can do to help those people, particularly women, because I just think it's harder.
In terms of things you feel, you can do day to day, say as a manager, women, I've got a team of junior women that I work with that, I've tried to support in their day-to-day roles. I would love to hear sort of what you think are maybe the top 3 things you can do as a manager to make sure that a more junior woman in the industry can feel sort of supported and ready to progress.
I think it's about championing them and giving them a voice, even when they're not in the room. If you've got really good women in your team, talk about them when they're not there, talk about their strengths, constantly champion them, and being very aware in meetings who's speaking and who's not speaking. You can have a room full of people, and not all the time, but quite often it will be the women that say the least. So I think encouraging everybody to speak and asking for opinions, just trying to give that confidence is really important. Also, I like the idea of, just going for coffee and having an informal chat and just understanding how women within your team are thinking and feeling, and if there's anything that you can do to support or help them. So being open and honest and having, honest conversations.
I think that's something I found really valuable in my career, actually, is having honest conversations with managers and with mentors and, people that will be candid with you. I think sharing experiences and just being open about your own lived experience is really helpful.
It's I'm at the other end of the spectrum now, and got challenges around perimenopause and all of that. And I've been, at times it's quite difficult. I've been really, really open about it at Unite because I've just started there. I've only been there 6 months and going through changes where you suddenly can't think of the word or whatever it might be. It can be a bit embarrassing, but I've been really open about it. And I think they do value honesty. There's nothing wrong with being a bit vulnerable occasionally.
I agree. I'd be interested to know, actually, something that I haven't worked with many colleagues that have been through that period in their life, but I know some of my peers in Savills have got, colleagues that they're trying to support. I'd be really interested to understand, what do you think sort of more junior team members could do to support you through sort of the menopausal period and that more challenging time?
That's a very good question. I think it's partly awareness and partly there's a responsibility on me or on those women to be open about it. Otherwise, it's a very difficult subject to approach, I think. So if they're willing to be open about it, I would, just ask what you can do to help, or if there's anything they need or any coping mechanisms or anything like that perhaps you can help with. I think it is quite a sensitive one, in that some people are very open about it and some people aren't. Some people really suffer and some don't. So, I wondered what all the chat was until it hit me like a ton of bricks. So it's quite personal, isn't it, I guess?
I think it's important, though, to raise awareness of the different challenges you face, during different stages of your career and different stages of your life. Like, I think we all need to be a bit more patient with one another and understanding of perhaps the different challenges we each face individually, because as much as, we're talking today about challenges that collectively women are facing, there's actually so many different nuances of the challenges you would face as an individual that others might not face even, broadly similar challenges.
Yeah. It's interesting. You go through your career and you're establishing yourself, you're growing, you start believing in yourself, you get the confidence and you get more senior in your role. And then, your confidence falls a bit as you go through hormonal changes. It's constant. And, I think it's really tough. That's hard for women. And I think it's hard for men, because they can't possibly understand, because they haven't been through it. That's really difficult. I guess they can understand to the extent that, they might live with their partners who perhaps become more challenging or whatever it might be. But if you haven't lived through something and you haven't experienced it, I think it's very, very difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoes, isn't it? Whoever you are.
Absolutely. I think if we all started sharing more of our lived experiences, we'd probably all find it a lot easier to support a more inclusive workspace.
Yeah,
because we'd understand what different people actually need. I'm also interested, you've mentioned a few times that building confidence throughout your career, and it's something, I've really worked on. I've progressed quite rapidly within my role, and, having the confidence to back myself in some situations can be quite challenging. I'd be interested to know how you've sort of overcome that feeling of maybe being out of place sometimes, being that imposter in a room.
I try to look at myself in the context of everybody else there and everybody else within the business, certainly my peers, and remind myself that I know as much, if not more, than they do. I think you got to step back and be rational about it and remind yourself why you've got to where you've got to and why people value you. You've gone rapidly through the organisation for a reason, and that's not people just being kind. You're obviously very good at what you're doing. Taking a step back, taking a breath, and knowing that is what I've always done. I'll walk into a room and think, oh God, what am I doing here? And then take a deep breath and look at everybody around you. You should be there as much as anyone else should. It's totally irrational.
I do think, confidence is something that really, there's some interesting psychology around it. If, you're born feeling confident about yourself, and then your confidence gets eroded by your experiences through your life. And I think it's a real shame sometimes that, I see it with some of my colleagues, that their confidence levels are really low in some of those, say, meeting scenarios. I do think it goes back to the point you made about, championing women. If you can hear positive things said about yourself, that really does help you to feel positive.
You're absolutely right. It makes a massive, massive difference. I don't know if this is a female thing or a personal thing, but you constantly question your ability. To hear someone talking positively about you is the most wonderful thing, and obviously boosts your confidence. You're absolutely right.
And I also think there's probably a point of more junior women and, junior staff members more generally talking positively about their managers as well, and about, the people they work with. I've worked with some, truly inspirational people in my career, and perhaps I don't tell them enough how sort of supportive and helpful and useful they've been in my career. So maybe, again, it's a lesson that we all should just be a bit more open and honest with each other on these kind of topics.
Yeah, and likewise, without being aggressive or difficult about it, I think when people behave poorly, that should be called out as well.
Absolutely. I think being able to sort of reward positively, but also, make sure that there are never those situations in a workplace where someone feels uncomfortable, that has to be managed appropriately. Otherwise, as an industry, we'll never progress.
I think that's right. I would definitely call out bullying or any form of bad behaviour. I just don't think there's any need for it, and it needs to be shut down. And I think everybody has a responsibility to do that. You shouldn't stand by and watch things that aren't quite right.
I completely agree. And I really thank you for sort of sharing the honesty on that. I'd just like to ask one last question to finish up, which would be, if you had one tip for somebody who's, say, 5 years into their career right now, what would you be telling them to do in terms of actions to help them progress?
Get out and meet people and get on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
It's all about who you know.
Absolutely. And actually, your network is always evolving. So,
and also you just meet interesting people. It's great meeting new people who are interesting and exciting, and that gives you an energy in itself, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's been great meeting you through this process as well.
No, you too, Sarah.
Thank you both for taking part in Empower Equity Reverse Mentoring sessions. Please do share the sessions with all of your networks. The more we open up the conversation of female retention, the more likely we are to see change. The Madison Berkeley Empower Equity Campaign Reverse Mentoring sessions are supported by industry network organisation Ladies in Real Estate.